Sasha Hako is an agent of the English military with different identities and personalities. She works for the MK Ultra program in the United States, where she is known as Dorothy Real, R-E-I-L, and lives in the Keene, New Hampshire area, where I am from. She befriended my ex-wife and was introduced to me around September of 2016 when I went to go see my daughter's soccer game. Dorothy was seated in an SUV type vehicle, and when I walked over to say hello to my ex-wife Rachel, Rachel looked at me and said, "This is my friend Dorothy." Dorothy said, "Hello, nice to meet you," with an intense, if not slightly crazy look in her eyes. She seemed very eager to make my acquaintance, but not in a nice way, but more in an intrusive way. So I said hello, and then looked back over at Rachel, who looked at me with a somewhat tired look in her eyes. I then said to Rachel, "I brought some folding chairs for us if you want." And at that point, Dorothy interrupted and said something like, "Well, that's very nice of you." And due to that, I considered Dorothy kind of rude because I wasn't talking to her. I was talking to Rachel, and she was trying to inject herself into the conversation. So I just ignored her comment and then walked to my car to get the folding chairs that I set up on the sideline of the soccer game that was just starting. So I had brought 3 chairs, one for Rachel and one for my older daughter. And of course my younger daughter was in the soccer game, but Rachel and my daughter did not walk over. They were busy talking to people that they knew from school, and they were standing a little ways away on the sideline. So instead, Dorothy and her son named Tancred, or Tancred, I'm not exactly sure how you spell that, they walked over and eventually sat in the 2 other chairs. Dorothy's son Tancred appeared to be in his late teens and was reading a book. He wore glasses and a baseball hat and had something of a nerdy appearance. So he sat down next to me reading his book, and a short time later, Dorothy sat in the other chair. So after the game, Dorothy thanked me for letting them sit there, even though I did not offer that option to them. They had just sat there as if I had brought the chairs for them. Even so, I said, "That's okay." And then I saw that the chair that Dorothy had sat in had something like a brown wax smeared on the side of it. So later on, when I cleaned the chair with bleach and water, the wax turned into a black stain. I would occasionally see Dorothy again at Rachel's house, like on Halloween night, when I went over there to pick up my daughters to go trick or treating. On one occasion, Dorothy and her son Tancred drove up in a car just when I was walking out of Rachel's house, and I saw that Tancred did not look the same as he did at the soccer game. He was dressed the same, baseball hat, glasses. He was even reading a book, but this time he looked much older, like he was in his early 30s, and appeared to be a different guy altogether. So for the past 2 years on Halloween night, in the year 2019 and 2020, when I would go to pick up my daughters to go trick-or-treating, Dorothy's younger son named Ezra would be there, also waiting to go with us. At that point, I learned that Dorothy lived in the same neighborhood as Rachel and my daughters. They lived right down the street from Rachel. So Dorothy's younger son, Ezra, is around the same age as my daughters. So in 2020, he was around 13 or 14 years old. Ezra is a very talkative and polite boy who reminded me of someone who would be a child actor. For example, when I told him that the electronic sliding door on my minivan was broken, He looked at me with just the saddest look forming in his eyes, and then he slowly hung his head down as if he was just so depressed to hear the news. So I thought that that was kind of funny, how dramatic Ezra was when I told him that the electronic sliding door on my minivan had broke. So in 2019, after taking my daughters and Ezra trick-or-treating around the neighborhood, I dropped Ezra off at his house and walked him to the door. Dorothy opened the front door and I saw this huge fabric wall hanging on the wall with an owl on it. But it did not look like a Halloween decoration. It looked like something that would be at a nature center, and it took up the whole wall. So Dorothy thanked me for taking Ezra trick-or-treating around the neighborhood and asked if I wanted to come in, but I told her that I had to get my daughters back home. I did not see Dorothy or Ezra until the following Halloween of 2020, when I went to go pick up my daughters to go trick-or-treating, and Ezra was there again. And this time I had to take both of my daughters, Ezra, and 2 other kids out as well. When I saw Ezra this time, his eyes looked very strange. Both his eyes looked blank and stared straight ahead, just like somebody with a glass eye. It looked like he had 2 glass eyes. And I guessed that that was due to MK Ultra programming. I have no idea how a kid's eyes would come to look like that, other than that. So we got into my minivan and I would drive them around the block. So the kids would jump out of the van and go run to the door, and then they would walk back to the van, get back in, and we would drive down to the next house. So I noticed that Ezra was acting erratic, and he once ran over and he jumped up and hit the hood of my van with both of his hands with this odd look in his eyes. So after they had finished trick-or-treating, they wanted to walk around the downtown area of Keene, and I walked around with them. At every intersection, Ezra tried to run across the intersections without concern for anybody's safety, attempting to prompt the other children to do the same. And I had to stand in front of him and continually tell him not to do that. So he seemed to be slightly crazy. When we got back to the van, Ezra began yelling out all of the swear words that he knew. The F word, the S word, the A word. He knew them all. My daughter Michaela knew a few too. And at that point, Ezra shouted something out, and it sounded like he said, and I quote, "I was in a porn with Joe Biden," end quote. So I should have asked Ezra to repeat himself, but I did not. Instead, I ignored what he said and told the kids to calm down and stop yelling. I let them go to one more house for trick-or-treating, and then we drove Ezra home. At that point, Dorothy had moved from her house that was located on the same street as Rachel to a condo complex off of Route 10. When I dropped Ezra off, I noticed that his front picture window was blocked off with what looked like a black tarp hanging over his front window at the condo. It may have been a Halloween decoration, but it looked kind of strange. So when I began to study the documentary, Black Holes, The Edge of All We Know, I realized that Sasha Hako was Dorothy Real. So I believe that Sasha Hako is actually a British agent, and Dorothy Real is one of her identities in America. She is a very pushy woman, and I believe that she was employed to spy on Rachel Vogt, my ex-wife. So that included getting close to Rachel Vogt as a neighbor and a friend. Sasha Hako then used that connection to attempt to meet and befriend me, but I went out of my way to avoid talking to Dorothy Real, also known as Sasha Hako, because of her strange and pushy attitude. So this is very common for England, for the English government to have agents in America. The English government still considers America its colony. So from their perspective, America would not exist at all if it had not been for England. So much of the attack on America, whether it be through the Federal Reserve Bank taking over the American economy, or through huge monopoly corporations taking over all the smaller businesses, what people need to start to realize is that much of this attack is controlled by England, the English military and the English government. And the English government is also taking over all of the United States land. And what they are doing is using a series of banks to loan people money for mortgages. And then they foreclose on them, taking over all of the real estate in America. Many of these agents of MK Ultra that I have exposed are in fact from England, even though they may speak with American accents and have American identities. Many agents of England have an ingrained hatred for America and how it challenged England in the Revolutionary War. Agents of England have no patriotic regard for America. They really do not care about our constitutional rights or our American freedoms, and they consider it their patriotic duty to England to infiltrate and destroy America. And they do this through the Federal Reserve and through planned economic attacks on America. They do this by taking over the American government with a shadow government. And that shadow government is Freemasonry. And Freemasonry's headquarters, or one of their major headquarters, is called the United Grand Lodge of England. And it is located, of course, in England. And they do this through the MK Ultra Mind Control Program, which is a joint English, German, and United States military program. So agents like Sasha Hako are British agents that do not care about American interests. And so she will do anything to undermine any structure in America. She will help wreck any American corporation. She will help destroy any branch of the American government. And she will help sabotage any American scientific or art program. Then, with absolutely no respect for the American people, she will go out of her way to provide disinformation to the American people, like with their black hole documentary, The Edge of All We Know. Second, I would like to comment on this man named Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking supposedly died in 2018. But I think that this is another lie from these people who often claim that their agents die. And they do this for ulterior motives. Unlike the official story, I think Stephen Hawking was born handicapped. And due to the MK Ultra mind control and radio frequency radiation experiments that he was subjected to, his condition got worse. So the English military is responsible for causing Stephen Hawking to grow increasingly worse over the years and develop into something like a quadriplegic. Stephen Hawking is from England and studied at the University of Cambridge, and he is known as something like a genius with a great mind concerning mathematics. However, he is unfortunately physically handicapped by his illness that they claim to be motor neuron disease. In any regard, both the English and the U.S. establishment seem to highly respect and admire Stephen Hawking. And in 2014, a Universal Pictures movie came out about Stephen Hawking's life entitled The Theory of Everything. And that movie was a blatant imitation of an earlier film called A Beautiful Mind, which was about a cutting-edge mathematician that may have been driven crazy by the CIA. Like all the other people I expose in this documentary, I am not going to fail to address what I know about Stephen Hawking just because he is a handicapped man and has had a rough life. At some point in the last 6 or 7 years, there's been a huge attempt made by the English and American establishment to reintroduce Stephen Hawking to the public as some sort of rebel within the theoretical physics community and also a genius. The truth is that Stephen Hawking is somebody that the English and American military will choose to promote while they attempt to lie and misinform the public. They have deemed that any new scientific discoveries are to be classified, and the public will be presented with a series of fabricated scientific facts and events. So the English government most likely considered that a man like Stephen Hawking would be perfect for this type of program. For one, Stephen Hawking had to communicate through a voice synthesizer, which is connected to a computer, so we cannot really be sure if any of what he is saying or being credited with saying is really coming from him. If Stephen Hawking is more of an invented man, something like a trademark, then he is another frontman who serves as a source of information, which is really derived from the English military. We must remember that these military groups really discourage any independent efforts. The emphasis is always on the group with a series of compartments working together. So if they are to put someone forward in the public eye who are credited with many scientific discoveries and findings, they will pick somebody who is a puppet. Stephen Hawking published a book called A Brief History of Time in 1988, and a few years later, in 1991, a documentary film was released based on the information in that book. So I saw this film, this documentary, called A Brief History of Time, around the start of 1994. I had rented it at a local video store in Hartford, Connecticut during my first year of college. I went to the University of Hartford, and oddly enough, it was in the new releases section. From what I remember, that film was very boring and difficult to understand. It seemed to be designed to exhibit the theories of astrophysics as something that would be too complex for most people. I remember not understanding much of what the documentary and Stephen Hawking's computerized voice was trying to explain, and I do not remember too much of a discussion on black holes. At that time, I was in my freshman year of college, where I was getting straight A's in my algebra classes, and I had developed an interest in math, which was one of the reasons I wanted to rent the film and learn a little more about physics and space. So I was a little deterred when I rented that movie, and from what I remember, it was very difficult to understand. It was almost designed that way on purpose. These people are just light years beyond the American public. You're going to need a doctorate degree in physics to even begin to understand what these geniuses are up to. So don't even bother, because these guys are the best. The strange thing is that I just watched that film again on YouTube, and it seems remarkably different. So much in fact that it is a different version than the one I saw in 1994. In this new version, there are a lot more personal stories about Stephen Hawking's youth and college days. And I do not remember any of these personal stories in the version I rented in 1994. In this newer version, aside from a lot of personal and entertaining stories told by Stephen Hawking's friends and family, there is a simplified discussion on Stephen Hawking's theories on black holes. So in the new version, it is much easier to understand, and Stephen Hawking's life story is presented in a way to appeal to general audiences. And this was nothing like the version I saw in 1994. This documentary seems so different now that I did a search to see if they were 2 volumes of A Brief History of Time. But according to Google, on July 13th, 2021, there is only one film called A Brief History of Time. So it is my belief that the establishment is creating different versions of the same film as part of the reintroduction of Stephen Hawking to the public. So it is very convenient for the establishment to say that he has died. So there will not be too much of a demand to go and see Stephen Hawking giving a lecture, having interviews with him, and so forth. And I believe that they are doing this because the English government plans to continue to release papers supposedly written by Stephen Hawking. And these papers will back up any of their new theories on space and physics. Of course, none of this will be written by Stephen Hawking. It will be written by English military intelligence. So I think that in the future, Stephen Hawking will serve as the English military's invented reference list. He will become something of a neo-Einstein, which the English military will continually write new papers and credit to him. In other words, they found another unpublished manuscript from Stephen Hawking, and it contains whatever new information they want to disinform the public with concerning space and physics. So Stephen Hawking becomes a trademark, a frontman for English military intelligence that will attribute whatever they want to him and use him as a reference. According to Einstein, this or that. Well, we can't argue with Einstein. He was the world's greatest genius. Well, according to Stephen Hawking, he thinks this, that, and the other thing. And of course, we can't argue with Stephen Hawking. Look at him. He was a complete genius. As his body failed, his mind only grew stronger and more powerful. He is nothing short of Dr. Xavier from the X-Men. So the English and the American establishment are basically rewriting history, deleting what it wants, and adding what suits them. I have never seen things so bad with the establishment basically fabricating everything with no regard to the public. They simply consider people to be completely ignorant and unable to figure anything out. So they think they could get away with anything, which includes changing old documentaries about all kinds of subjects and releasing them as the originals. And they have done this all throughout the truth movement. Men like Jordan Maxwell and Michael Tsarian, together with corporations like YouTube, are completely re-editing all of their old documentaries and interviews. They're taking out everything they want to take out. They're deleting the old versions from the databanks of YouTube. And we are only left with these new edited documentaries. So that also includes Stephen Hawking and his film A Brief History of Time, supposedly released in the early 90s. Next, I know Stephen Hawking to be involved in the MK Ultra mind control program in the United States. He is essentially an agent that will be connected to others through the radio frequency energy systems. This will cause the people that he is connected to develop deformities, problems, and illnesses much like his. But that is the point to MK Ultra. It is a military weapon-based system focused on mind as well as soma, control. And soma is a word for body. MK Ultra wants to turn people into robots. That is what your US military and the English military are working so hard to do. That is where all your tax dollars are going. So these psychotics in the US military and the English military and the German military and the Italian military to experiment on how to turn everybody into robots. So in the summer of 2013, I saw a man who looked exactly like Stephen Hawking in a wheelchair in Waterbury, Connecticut. At that time, I was living in Derby, Connecticut, but I had a part-time job working at the neighborhood convenience store on Scott Road in Waterbury, Connecticut. That store was right down the street from where I used to live before I moved. So a couple nights a week, I would drive from Derby to Waterbury, Connecticut to work a 4-hour shift at the neighborhood convenience store. My tasks included working in the walk-in cooler, organizing the drink shipment onto the shelves, and taking down the old, outdated dairy products. I would also stock the shelves with all the incoming grocery products taken out of cardboard boxes. Then I would take all the flattened cardboard boxes out across the parking lot to the recycling dumpster. So one night in the summer of 2013, when I was out there, I looked and saw a man in a wheelchair seated about 50 feet away from where I was putting the cardboard in the dumpster. And he looked exactly like Stephen Hawking. He was seated outside one of the other businesses in this office park type area. So the area was pretty well lit, even though it was late out and all the businesses were closed. There were floodlights on in the parking lot and there were exterior lights on. So this guy in a wheelchair was about 50 feet away from me in front of another building. So I looked over at him and I thought to myself, he looks exactly like Stephen Hawking, the wheelchair physicist. And at that exact moment, one of Stephen Hawking's arms shot straight up in the air. And he had his hand kind of clenched together, something like a fist. And his arm stayed like that in the air. So around that time in 2013, I was used to the US military's stalking and harassment program. So I just laughed it off, thinking that it was some sort of trick, something like street theater. So at that time, I thought that maybe they had hooked his arm to a lever and somehow mechanically raised his arm, because his arm did not go straight back down. It just stayed up in the air. So I smiled at him. I threw the rest of the cardboard into the dumpster. I locked it up, and then I went back to work at the neighborhood convenience store. So now, knowing what I know about the military's MK Ultra program, I would not be surprised to learn that they used something like a neural, remote-controlled energy, or soma control to raise one of his arms. Then, a few years later, in the year 2016, I saw Stephen Hawking outside of a nursing home located in Swansea, New Hampshire, about 20 minutes away from where I lived. I was driving around the area. Then I would park my car and go door to door handing out flyers, advertising the book that I wrote called Leech Mob, a novel about a Connecticut gang. So I saw a large outdoor theater and a road right next to it. So I drove up the road to see where that led. So I saw a street next to the outdoor theater, and I drove up that street to see what that area was. And I saw that part of it was a nursing home. So I walked over to the nursing home to ask somebody who worked there about the outdoor theater. There was some patio furniture on a deck outside the front door of the nursing home. And on a sofa type bench was laying an individual who looked handicapped. The person was laying on their side with a little bent and twisted body. And as I walked past, I looked at that individual's face and saw that it was Stephen Hawking. The strange thing is that Stephen Hawking had a blonde wig on and was dressed in a yellow dress as though he were a woman. So like many other members of MK Ultra, Stephen Hawking puts on disguises, which includes dressing in drag, which includes dressing as the opposite sex. That is a big part in the military's MK Ultra program. They have the men dress up like women and the women dress up like men, because eventually they want to eliminate the sexes. So not only do they want to completely restructure human society, they want to completely change the human race so that everybody becomes something like asexual, and children are brought up in military barracks instead of in regular homes. So homosexuality is encouraged in the military because homosexuals like to be with their own sex the most. They're the ones who do not miss going out with somebody of the opposite sex, getting married, and having a regular family. So homosexuals do the best in the military and in a military-controlled society. So that is definitely who is promoted in all of this, is homosexuals. In conclusion, the military establishment continues to advertise a huge fallacy in regards to MK Ultra, and that has to do with somebody being damaged in some capacity, and that actually makes them stronger in other capacities. So I remember reading some reports about mind control, and they were talking about trauma-based mind control. And what they were saying is that by damaging people's brain stems, putting them through trauma-based mind control and damaging their brain stems, we're causing these people to develop some amazing abilities concerning psychic abilities and increased mental abilities. And this is a huge falsehood. This is an excuse that comes from the military to kind of cover up what they are really interested in doing. And that is to completely handicap the human species. They want to break the human species so that they become very easy to control. So a huge part of MK Ultra is to essentially handicap all of their agents so that they are physically ill. What they often do is let these soldiers become physically strong on military bases. And once they get out of the military has a program to break all of these soldiers and to encourage them to live unhealthy lifestyles, to gain a lot of weight, to do a lot of drinking and drugs, to become very lazy. Oftentimes they get injured because they are driven into psychotic fits of rage, and they end up injuring themselves, either in accidents or in fights, or they overdo their exercise program and they rip out their shoulders or their joints or their backs. And that is the process of MK Ultra. They desire this to happen. You had your good year or two already. Now it's time for you to give all of that up. So these agents who become extremely obese or have breathing or cardiac problems, or they are over-medicated because they all have back, spine, and joint problems. But in place of all of that, a lot of them are told that they have brilliant minds, and they have to serve in the capacity of a handler at that point. So by doing this, the military creates a race of agents who are perfect to spy on others in American society, because these handicapped or obese agents are confined to their homes. They don't like to leave their houses or take part in any activities whatsoever. So all the military has to do is take these type of agents and put them next door to you and your families. Then by connecting these agents to you through the radio frequency energy systems, you can develop whatever problems these agents have. For example, stomach cancers, lung cancers, disintegrating joints and spinal problems, mental problems, anger problems, depression problems, and absolutely no energy or drive to do anything. These are all the benefits that come along with the military breaking their own people and then attaching their people to you. If you are a normal American with an interest in life and raising your families correctly, these are the type of agents that will serve as your handler. A 350-pound enraged psycho with knee problems and back problems. So this is how they end up breaking everybody. This is how they end up causing injuries through the whole American society, from their own soldiers, who then do it to American civilians. And if you go to the hospital, they'll tell you that you've developed some sort of illness, or that your joints are disintegrating just due to old age, or some problem with your diet, or maybe it's hereditary. But they will never tell you that it's due to this MK Ultra mind and soma control program through this radio frequency or radiation experiments. So Stephen Hawking demonstrates this misconception where there is an extremely handicapped man, and they want you to believe that his mind has grown stronger due to his body becoming weaker. So everybody should understand that the human body is a holistic system. If one part of your body grows sick, sooner or later, the rest of your body will suffer. If you have heart or lung disease, the rest of you is not going to get stronger because of that. And if you have somebody who is very smart, if they decide never to exercise, never to go outside, slowly they will begin to lose whatever mental gifts they had to begin with as their body grows weaker and more handicapped. They're going to lose their intelligence. But this is what these militaries are endorsing. They want you to accept the fact that all these people go through a program that's going to break them, handicap them, give them illnesses, and they want you all to believe it's for your own good. Something good came out of it. And I'm not talking about a guy who loses his legs, so he works his arms out to be real strong. I'm talking about a class of people going out of their way to destroy the human race. It is not survival of the fittest or adapting to your environment. It is survival of the weakest, taking it out on everybody else. So what they have is these men who are always content at being lazy, selfish, overweight, unproductive, and they are elevated into positions of power, and they are jealous of everybody else. So it's just natural for them to break everybody else. So they become just like these men who are always naturally broken, naturally weak, never really had the will or drive to do anything. That seems to be who is in control of these programs. So it is my opinion that Stephen Hawking is on huge doses of painkiller medication, and he is also extremely psychotic, and that he has mental illnesses. So if they connect a man like Stephen Hawking to you, you are going to develop the same illnesses and problems that Stephen Hawking has. So the English military and the US military likes to use Stephen Hawking as an agent in this regard. On a side note, I am sure that everybody is familiar with the subject of aliens and what are known as gray aliens, which are reported to have small bodies and large oversized craniums. It is also reported that these gray aliens have increased intelligence and gifts like telepathy, but they are also physically sick with genetic problems. So I think that it is very interesting that gray aliens, also known as synthetic humans, also demonstrate this process of a weakened body with a so-called advanced mind. Other reports state that the gray aliens are essentially biological robots and have to be continuously recycled because their bodies are so sick they do not live longer than a month or two. So much like these aliens that the US government and the English government is always covering up and lying about, have also seemed to go through this process that these militaries are endorsing now. Next is this woman identified as Leah Medeiros in the Black Holes, The Edge of All We Know documentary. And in December of 2016, Leah Medeiros was in a gymnastics class that appeared to be for children who were around 15 or 16 years old. My daughters were taking a class for slightly younger children that ran at the same time as the class that Leah Medeiros was in. In the Black Holes documentary, released in 2018, she appears to be in her mid to late 20s. So my question is, why is Leah Medeiros from the Event Horizon telescope program taking a gymnastics class with 15 and 16-year-old girls in Keene, New Hampshire at the end of 2016? And the answer is because this is what the Event Horizon telescope program may really be about. Like always, the intelligence community will often hide what they are working on by having a front company or a front objective that serves as a buffer. I believe that the Event Horizon telescope program may have very little to do with locating and taking a photograph of a black hole, and have more to do with increasing the levels of radio frequency energy being directed to certain areas on Earth and to aid in the military's directed energy weapon attacks on American civilians. So when they're talking about combining all of these telescopes so they could project this radio frequency energy into space and take a better photograph of an area in space, this just might be a front of taking all those telescopes and having them project energy at a certain place in America to aid with MK Ultra programming and directed energy weapon attacks. Next is this woman, identified as Janna Levin on the Black Holes documentary, where it says that she is involved in cosmology. She is also believed to live in the Keene, New Hampshire area, where she is known as Marlin Gostila. This is a video taken of Marlin and Chris Gostila at my daughter's softball game around July of 2019. So this is Marlin Gostila, also known as Janna Levin, from the Event Horizon telescope program. Marlin Gostila and her husband in the spring of 2019 under very confusing circumstances that suggested that both Marlin and Chris Gostila were attempting to cause problems by confusing plans being made concerning my daughter and their daughter, so that I did not even know where my daughter would be staying that night. So my ex-wife, named Rachel Vogt, is a very trusting person, but unfortunately, she is also a very naive person. And this is what most regular people are like, who have no idea what the U.S. military is involved in concerning not only the MK Ultra program, but regulating the day-to-day lives of American citizens, and ultimately for criminal purposes. Due to the military serving in an undercover capacity in American society, regular Americans will obviously see these agents as other regular people. And even when their agents begin to act a little unusual, American citizens will put up with it or even make excuses for their behavior, because the American public will want to be polite or try to get along with these undercover agents who will pose as their neighbors and the parents of their children's friends. So American citizens end up being controlled by undercover military agents who are taking part in illegal actions against the American public. So nothing is better at explaining this than with an example of what happened to me concerning this agent identified as Janna Levin on the Black Holes documentary, who goes by the name Marlin Gostila in the Keene, New Hampshire area. So I had been very busy working all day, and around 5 or 6 o'clock at night, my ex-wife Rachel calls me up on the phone, and she says that something has come up at her job at the last moment, so she needs my help with our daughter's plans with her friend named Janna Gostila and the Gostila family, who just happened to live a few minutes away from me. So Rachel goes on to tell me that she has made plans for our daughter named Eliza to stay over Janna Gostila's house that night for a sleepover. But the Gostila family is not going to be home for another 2 hours. So Rachel wants to drop Eliza off at my house and ask me to get her some dinner. And then when the Gostilas arrive home in an hour or two, then I could drive Eliza up and drop her off at the Gostila's house so she could have a sleepover with her friend. So I said fine, and I started making dinner. And a little while later, Rachel dropped Eliza off and gave me a piece of paper with directions written on it on how to get to the Gostila's house, which was located just down the street from where I live. So about an hour later, Rachel calls me on the phone and says that Marlin Gostila has just called her and changed the plans, and says that I should just drop Eliza off at the nearby Chinese restaurant where Marlin and Chris Gostila will pick her up at. So of course, I did not like the sound of that, dropping my 14-year-old daughter off at the local Chinese food restaurant where her friends would then pick her up at. So I told Rachel, no, I don't want to drop Eliza off at some restaurant. So give Marlin Gostila my number and tell her to call me when they are ready for Eliza to be dropped off at their house as originally planned, and that way I can meet them. So Rachel hangs up and then calls back a few minutes later and says the reason they want to meet at the restaurant is because Eliza's friend actually works at the Chinese restaurant. So that confused me a little bit, and I asked Rachel why a 14-year-old girl would be working at a Chinese restaurant, and Rachel said that she didn't know. And at that time, Rachel began to act a little stressed out on the phone because she was busy at her work which was why she needed to involve me in these plans at the last moment. But I knew that the worst thing that I could do was start to get stressed out with her on the phone, lose my temper, and then possibly get in an argument with her because of what these people, the Gostilas, were doing. So again, we hung up the phone, and a little while later, Rachel called back and said that Janna Gostila actually babysat for the owners of the Chinese food restaurant and was in the apartment upstairs from this restaurant. So Marlin Gostila wanted me to drop my daughter off at the restaurant so she could go upstairs with Janna and then wait for the Gostilas to show up. So I do not know why Marlin Gostila would refuse to explain any of this clearly until now. Rachel had to call Marlin Gostila up on the phone 2 or 3 times to clarify any of this. So it was pretty obvious that Marlin Gostila was being very difficult on purpose. So I don't know if this sounds normal to most people, but it did not sound exactly normal to me. Dropping my child off at a Chinese restaurant so she could go upstairs to one of the apartments where her friend was babysitting. But I realized that Rachel was preoccupied with what was happening at her job. So I told Rachel fine, and I hung up. So a normal parent would just agree to have you meet them at their house when you are dropping your child off for a sleepover. And those have been the original plans that Marlin Gostila made with Rachel, because Rachel had given me a piece of paper with the directions to their house written on it. So Marlin Gostila just wanted to come up with these insane plans, which did not make much sense, to create confusion and problems in my and Rachel's life. So I asked Eliza if she knew that Janna worked as a babysitter for the people who owned the Chinese restaurant, and Eliza said that she did not. So the restaurant was located just a minute away from my house. So on the way there, I asked Eliza how she met Janna, and Eliza said they were on the same softball team together. Eliza also said that Rachel was very good friends with Marlin Gostila, but this was the first time I had ever heard about the Gostilas, so I guessed that that was a little bit of an exaggeration, and they probably just met them in the last year. So when we got to the restaurant, I explained to the waitress that we were there to meet Janna, who was babysitting for them, and also Janna's parents, who were going to meet us there. And we were told to take a table, which happened to be in the bar section of the restaurant. It was a well-lit area with a sushi bar and a regular bar. So Eliza and I sat down at a table and we waited. So about 15 minutes later, Chris and Marlin Gostila entered the restaurant. And at the exact same time, Janna walks downstairs holding a baby, holding a 1-year-old baby that appeared to be Asian. So Marlin Gostila appeared slightly odd in that she did not make eye contact. She was trying her best to smile, but she came across as being somewhat cold. However, her husband Chris was smiling and he seemed very friendly and outgoing. So I introduced myself to them both and shook both of their hands. And I said that I felt uncomfortable with just dropping my daughter off at a restaurant. So I wanted to hang around and meet them when they arrived. And Chris, who was doing all of the talking, said that of course he understood, but they were not home and thought that this would be a good meeting place because this was where Janna worked. So I said, okay, and well, it was nice meeting you. And why don't you have Eliza call me tomorrow? And I'll drive up to your house and pick her up. And at that point, Chris says, well, no, because Janna and Eliza are spending the night at a third girl's house who lives in Keene. And I said, well, Rachel said Eliza was spending the night at your house. And Chris says, no, I guess she got the plans confused. And I said, so you are going to drive them over to that house in Keene right now? And Chris says, actually, I just got off the phone with the girl's father and they are at Walmart now. So they asked us to meet them at Walmart. And Asiana and Eliza will then get into their car and the third child's father will then drive them to her house. So at that point, I should have insisted that I drive my daughter over to the third girl's house myself so that I could see exactly where she lived. But that would have ruined their plans because nobody's home at that girl's house either. And so their plans were to meet that girl's father at Walmart. So I looked over at Asiana, who's standing there holding a 1-year-old baby. And I look at my daughter, who's kind of standing there looking at me a little bit uncertain, as if I may just appear a little bit overbearing if I insist driving with them to the Walmart parking lot, meeting that father, and then following them to their house. I just might look like an overbearing and paranoid dad. And the last thing that I want to look like is the weird guy. These are some of the thoughts that occurred to me. Of course, Chris and Marlin Gostila, they don't look like the weird people. Everything that they're doing is completely normal. If you don't like their plans, maybe you got something confused because everything is just so normal concerning them. So if I have advice, is to do exactly that. To say to them, no, I am going to need to know where my daughter is staying that night. And I'll have to drive her there myself. Otherwise, I do not feel comfortable with the plans that you have made. You have to insist. But it's like a lot of pressure is put on you. And the attitude of these people is either extremely calm or looking at you as if you have some sort of problem. You're being paranoid if you don't like all of their plans. So Chris Gostila acted very calm and comfortable and was smiling and making eye contact, while his wife Marlin looked at me like I was the unusual one. So because of all of this, I consented to trusting the Gostila's plans. But when I got back home, I called Rachel. And I told Rachel what happened. I said the plans have changed once again. And Chris and Marlin Gostila are now driving Asiana and Eliza to meet a third girl and her father in the parking lot of Walmart. And they're actually staying at this third girl's house in Keene. So the Gostilas are changing the plans on us yet again. So Rachel says I must have misunderstood them. So she would call them on their cell phone and then call me right back. So Rachel called back in a minute and said that everything is fine, that she must have misunderstood the plans, and that she also knows this third girl and exactly where she lives. So it's no big deal, and that she would pick up Eliza the next day. So I do not think that Rachel got the plans confused. I believe that Marlin and Chris Gostila arranged it all to happen this way, so that the plans got more strange and more confusing. So in any regard, this is an example of people like Marlin Gostila, also known as Janna Levin, who is an agent of the Event Horizon Radio Frequency Telescope program, using something like psychological tactics to set up plans that are confusing and aim to cause problems. It may not seem like a big deal until you are forced to go through it, with the military using electronic harassment while you are going through this, which is the whole point, to MK Ultra mind control. So throughout this whole ordeal, Rachel was good at calling me back quickly, even though that she was busy at work. But to be critical of her, this is how regular people are easily swept into their plans, where these government agents take over especially when someone is preoccupied with something else. And to be critical of myself, I should have stuck to my guns about making sure. I knew exactly where Eliza was going, but I dropped my guard after meeting Chris Gostila, seeing that he appeared very nice and friendly, and thinking that if I did not go along with them at least a little, I would appear paranoid or crazy and cause more problems for myself. Concerning the Gostilas possibly complaining to Rachel, "What's wrong with your husband? Is he usually that paranoid? Is he usually that controlling?" So the people who are involved in these type of programs know how to appear very nice and friendly so that people would drop their guard and trust them. So people are often at their mercy. So this is how children go missing. So I want to warn everyone of these agents' tactics. So I saw Marlin Gostila, also known as Janna Levin, on a few occasions after that. And for some reason, she always seemed to have an anger problem. If my daughter had plans with Asiana, and I would have to drive Eliza somewhere to meet her, when I'd see Marlin Gostila, she always seemed not only angry, but as if she did not like me for some reason. Another strange thing about the Gostilas concerns their daughter Asiana. The first time I met her was at the Chinese restaurant, and she was wearing glasses, and she appeared around 12 or 13 years old. Then a few months later, while at my daughter's softball game, this older girl that looked a little bit like Asiana began waving at me and saying hello. So I guessed that that may have been Asiana, but for some reason, she appeared 5 years older than she did a few months ago. This girl looked more like in her late teens or even 20. So I asked Eliza, "Is that Asiana?" And Eliza said yes. So as I reported before, the military is using young adults in the public school system in order to influence the other children. Obviously, if a 20-year-old is hanging out with a 15-year-old, the 20-year-old will have an influence and control over the younger children. So the military is doing this on a wide scale as a form of controlling society. It is something like the television show called 21 Jump Street, where young undercover cops act like they are teenagers in high school. But the truth is that they are not doing this to bust drug dealers or gangs, but to better control American society, which is now considered a target of the U.S. military. And this is one of the ways that they will take over American families. So next I would like to talk about Marlin Gostila's husband, named Chris Gostila. First, I do not even know if that is also his last name. Even though he appears Hispanic, my daughter said that she asked him once, and he said that he was actually French and not Hispanic. Chris said his wife Marlin and his daughter Asiana were Hispanic, but that he was not. Next, I was on Facebook one day, and I found a photograph on someone's Facebook page who went to the same high school that I did, which is Brookfield High School in Connecticut. And there was a photograph shown here of a group of kids wearing football jerseys. I was in the graduating class of 1993, and these guys were younger. So I would guess that they would be in the class of 1994 or 1995. So as soon as I saw this individual in this group photograph, I recognized him as he appeared to be Chris Gostila. But according to that Facebook page, he was identified as a Brian Callahan. So I thought back and I remembered a guy that appeared like this, but I only knew him for a short time when I was in the 10th grade. And I believe that his name was Chris Wilson. And he was a freshman when I was a sophomore. And I'd only see Chris Wilson on the bus. and he was a friendly, talkative kid that I joked around with several times on the bus. And I think that we may have hung out once after school and played football with some other kids. So after the 10th grade, I do not remember seeing Chris Wilson on the bus or at Brookfield High School. The strange thing was that Chris Wilson was a friendly guy that I got along pretty well with. So I think that I would remember seeing Chris at the school. I'm sure that I would have seen him in the hallways or at a school dance or at a party. But it was like he went to school for 1 year in the 9th grade. And then after that he moved, because I do not remember seeing Chris Wilson again. So this individual in this group photograph looks like Chris Wilson, only he's identified as Brian Callahan on this Facebook page. Then I did a search for Brian Callahan, and there is no Facebook page for this Brian Callahan. So I guess that this photograph was taken somewhere between the years of 1994 and 1996. And this is Chris Wilson, identified as Brian Callahan, hanging out with kids from the graduating class of 1995 or 1996. Then, as fate would have it, he now lives on the exact same road as I do in New Hampshire. And he goes by the name Chris Gostila. So I was studying these two photographs of this guy identified as Brian Callahan and this video I took of Chris Gostila when he was in the crowds at my daughter's softball game. And I believe that he is also the actor known as Jack Black. And Jack Black was in movies like The Cable Guy and Nacho Libre. And like I said before, Chris Gostila, also known as Chris Wilson, he knows how to be very social and very talkative so that people like him and trust him. And this is very important in a military-run society, because the military needs actors that specialize in appealing to people. And the military will use these actors as frontmen, as politicians, or as people being interviewed on the news. And of course, in military operations concerning the American public. This is the guy that they used to get me to trust them when they were acting strange through that Chinese food restaurant incident. I guess the military may have found that a lot of their soldiers are not likable, so they are not good public figures. So when addressing the public, either through the media or in person, the military has found that it is best to use professional actors. They're the ones who are trained to act like somebody they are not, to put on an act so well that they could fool people. And that is very important in politics, on the news, and of course in society. While the military is stealthily infiltrating and taking over American society, they will use actors to appear as good guys and get close to American families. So that is what worked, even on me, somebody who knows their tactics. So when I met Chris Gostila, also known as Chris Wilson, also known as Jack Black, he seemed like a very likable guy, just as when I met him on the bus when we were just kids in high school. But I want everybody to understand that this is just an act. And these actors can really fool people into thinking that they are good guys, especially when everything is going their way. But oftentimes, these actors are some of the worst people that they have involved with the MK Ultra program. So the last time I saw Chris Gostila, also known as Jack Black, my daughter called me up and said that she was over Asiana's house and she wanted to know if I could come pick her up. So I drove over, I honked the horn, and my daughter came out of the house and got into my van. And as we were driving down the driveway, Chris Gostila drove up at a somewhat fast rate of speed. And this time it looked like something was wrong with Chris. As he passed by, I got a good look at him. He was smiling and he was waving, but his eyes appeared enraged and they were pitch black. And it looked like he was gritting his teeth in anger, but was trying to hide his rage behind a grin. So something was going on with Chris that day, and he totally lost the whole act as a level-headed, very friendly, good-natured, good guy. He looked almost ravenous. So understand that all these guys involved with the MK Ultra program, everything they do is just an act. All of these professional actors will often change their looks and act in different roles while interacting with members of the American public who have been chosen as targets of the military's MK Ultra program. These secret societies consider this their entertainment and power over the regular citizens of America. These criminal actions against the American people is what binds these people together in secrecy, who consider it fun to place American citizens under mind control and then set them up to be hurt or killed. And this is what creates a network of sadistic and egotistical insiders who view the masses as something below them. This sort of mentality is what has always been favored by military dictatorships or royal hierarchies or giant religions. This is how the few control the many, by first promoting a sadistic and idiotic ruling establishment. Next is a woman identified as Priyam Vada Natarajan in the Black Holes documentary. It says that she is involved in computational astrophysics, and she only appears in the documentary for a brief 10 seconds where she says, and I quote her, "I have always had a pull towards the invisible and the mysterious. I sort of naturally gravitated to black holes, but a black hole is very, very hard to understand with just the equations," end quote. So she appears to speak fluent English with an American accent, and after her quote is shown something like a black hole graph simulation. And that is all for Priyam Vada. About a year ago, I was researching the Hare Krishna religion, and I found a documentary on Facebook that was entitled Amma. So I do not know if that is the actual name for that documentary, or if that is just what the person who uploaded it named it. And it features an Indian guru called Amma, which means mother. Her full name is Mata Amrit Anandamayi, and she is known as the hugging saint by her followers. And it appears that everybody gets in line to receive a hug from Amma. So I believe that this is the same woman identified as Priyam Vada in the Black Holes documentary. Even though she appears a little younger in the Black Holes documentary, agents of the British, United States, and Indian government are known to change the way they look so that they are not recognized and could therefore act in many different roles, like government politicians, religious heads, and media personalities. So this woman is also just a professional actor. So Amma is also known as a humanitarian who founded a charitable organization that provides food, shelter, and health care to homeless and needy people in India. And according to Wikipedia, they are also involved with education and disaster relief. In the year 1985, there was a book written called Matha Amrit Anandamayi, Sacred Stories and Realities. And in that book, the author claimed that the miracles performed by Amma were falsified and that there were many suspicious deaths in and around her ashram, which is a Hindu monastery. And due to this book, Amma got the Kerala state government in India to press charges against the writer and owner of the publishing company. And his name is Serene Patathanam. So it is not popular to criticize Amma or her Hare Krishna ashrams that appear to be located all over India and also in the United States. In any case, whoever is interested in this book, there is supposedly an English version entitled The Death of Her Own Brother. Amma is said to be born in 1953, which would make her around 64 years old, around the time the Black Holes documentary was being filmed. However, in the Black Holes documentary, I would guess her to be around 50 to 60 years old. So first, just because Amma's organization claims that she was born in 1953 doesn't make it necessarily true. In the Black Holes documentary, her hair is completely black as though it had been dyed, and it appears to be recently styled in something like a Western fashion, even though she is wearing clothes that appear to be from India. So I think that British intelligence want her to appear young in the Black Holes documentary while appearing somewhat older when she acts as Amma, the Indian guru and the head of the Math, which is a large charitable organization that acts as something of a government agency that provides food, shelter, disaster relief, and environmental protection, among other benefits to the Indian populations. What is interesting is that according to Wikipedia, the Indian government pressed charges against the writer that critically discussed Amma's religion and all the strange deaths associated with it. And they did this on the grounds that religious sentiments had been offended. And I quote Wikipedia, in 2004, the Kerala state government sanctioned criminal prosecution of Patathanam, the owner of the publishing company and the printer of the book, on the grounds that religious sentiments had been offended and for the libelous statements in the book. So that seems to be a high-level move from the English and the Indian government. First, they assign a lot of power and influence to a religious figure as head of the Math, which is basically a large economic organization that focuses on the social needs of India. Then, by putting a religious head at the top of that organization, that makes it so nobody is even allowed to critically discuss that organization. So it's a way to ban freedom of speech and freedom of press concerning giant corporations that seem to act as a government agency. So that is what empires have done all along. And that is to hide giant militaries and war and economic controls behind religion, and then attack anybody who criticizes their corrupt agenda as being against their little spiritual religion. So they hide their corporate government agenda behind religious themes, and they make it so you are unable to criticize these large corporations that are hiding behind the veil of religion. So that is like saying, if you don't like the Roman Empire, that means that you are against Jesus Christ. And this is what ruling establishments and empires have done all through history to confuse people and to cause arguments, fights, and wars. So to understand large empires like the British Empire and the Roman Empire and the Babylonian Empire, people have to understand that this was the first great merger, and that was a merger of government with religion. Another thing is that there are several interviews on YouTube featuring Amma, and in all the ones that I have seen, she is speaking Indian and she needs a translator if someone is asking her questions in English. But in the Black Holes documentary, she speaks fluent English. So again, I think that is a role that she is playing to amplify just how Indian she is when she acts as Amma and has nothing at all to do with England or even the English language. So no one is more Indian than Amma. And that is a great cover for someone who may be part of British intelligence. So much like in the United States, India is highly controlled by the British government and by the British intelligence community. So the English government controls the Indian government through banks and the economy. And the English government then elects British trained agents like Amma, Mata Amrit Anadamayi, also known as Priyam Vada, Natarajan. So I want to discuss the video that I saw with Amma in it. This was the first time I came to learn of Amma. And once again, it was entitled Amma on Facebook by the person who uploaded it. And it was about a 20-minute video that had a Hare Krishna song playing throughout it. And for the most part, a huge emphasis of that video was placed on children involved in this Hare Krishna temple. I think most of that video showed clips of children who belong to this temple or ashram. So one of the few scenes that caught my attention was this one, and it showed a young girl who appeared to be in a lethargic state, and someone is dragging the girl, and then somebody is shoving the girl's head. Then the next shot is the same girl now appearing to be in a happily drugged or hypnotized state, and she is shown dancing around and playing in the water. So I thought it was strange because of the two extremes. First, the young girl appears to be misbehaving or acting difficult, and what is implied is then under the guidance of the Amma cult, the young girl enters some sort of hypnotized and blissful state. So her behavior seems to go from one extreme to another. It doesn't seem that this girl is ever acting normal and acting like a regular kid. She goes from lethargic to dancing around as if she is drugged or hypnotized. It's one or the other. Then later on in the video, Amma, once again who is known as the hugging saint, is shown hugging a bunch of people, including children. And my attention goes to one boy. He appears to be around 10 years old, and he has what is called a bindi, or a red dot on his forehead. And if you look closely at it, it appears to be causing some type of head wound. The skin on that area of his forehead appears to have sunken in. So this appears to be evidence of abuse. I guess millions of people all across India have worn bindis as a religious decoration. But in this case, it is causing this kid's forehead to be scarred. So possibly his caregiver is applying some type of bindi makeup that is causing this irritation, or they are removing the bindi the wrong way by scrubbing his face in that area over and over again until they have damaged his skin. So I think that this religious group with thousands of years of experience understands the proper way to apply and remove these bindis so that people's face do not become injured. So this wound on his forehead appears to be deep. So I think that it is evidence of ongoing abuse by this child's caregivers. So Amma, known as the hugging saint, in my opinion, is hugging these children very tightly. And she hugs them so tightly that their backs bow inward and their heads go back as if they are in some type of wrestling hold by Amma. I looked at these other people, these adults, receiving hugs from Amma, and they appear to understand that they should bow their heads when they go to give Amma a hug. so that they are not squeezed to death by Amma. But apparently these children do not know that. They do not bow their heads. So Amma gives them a hug that appears to warp their bodies during her grasp. I have 2 daughters, and this is not a normal hug that you will give to children. In 1 or 2 of these cases, the kids appear to flinch a little bit. Also included in the video are a few very brief shots that appear to be taken at a Hindu temple. So the editor of the video made sure that the cuts were extremely short so that you could not really understand what is happening in these scenes. But in one, it appears as if a line of people are being walked down a street or a corridor, and they are being shoved at times by other men acting as controllers. There are also these quick shots of some type of gathering at a temple, because you could see what appears to be a religious statue shown here. The room appears to be jam-packed with people to the point that it looks unsafe, and the crowd appears to be jerking around as if there is some type of struggle happening. Then the next shot appears to be in another extremely crowded room, and if you play that 6-second video clip a few times in a row, it appears as if the people in the area are gathered around someone, and then somebody in the crowd reaches out and appears to grab their face and yank it to the side. Then something appears to be cut out of that video. There is a short cut. Then we see that crowd appear to move forward while looking at somebody or something crawling on the floor. All the attention is directed to the floor, and everybody is walking as if something is moving on the floor. And I cannot see for sure, but it appears as if 2 men are filming what is happening or taking photographs. So in any case, this does not exactly look like a wholesome spiritual experience taking place. A bunch of people getting shoved along on the street. Then these rooms that are jam-packed with people who appear to be involved with some type of struggle happening, whereupon the attention is focused on something moving on the floor. Also included in that video was a 2-second clip of an Indian child standing behind a gate wearing a red outfit. I do not understand why the creators of that video would choose this scene, because it looks rather negative. The child is not smiling and appears to be somewhat angry about something, and the gate that he is standing behind looks a lot like jail bars, as if he is locked up in prison. And if you quickly glance at the video, it looks as if he is filled with a dozen red holes due to the design of the metal bars. So this does not exactly look like an uplifting or positive image of a child. Another image included in this video is a short clip of a child with his face painted blue, and he has a somewhat haunted look in his eyes. So altogether, it seems like the creator of this video was attempting to imply something about a hidden side to their religion, and that video may be attempting to appeal to sick people. So based on all of this, I would recommend anyone look into this further and possibly start with that book entitled The Death of Her Own Brother. Next, I want to address this individual identified as Andy Strominger in the Black Holes documentary, and he is identified as being involved with theoretical physics. This man also looks very familiar. and I believe that he worked at Danbury Ambulance in Danbury, Connecticut around 1999, and at that time he said his name was Jeff. I was an emergency medical technician, and Jeff was a paramedic, which is an EMT with a lot more medical training. So I worked with him a couple of times, but one shift stands out in my mind when we got a call to Garner Prison, located in Newtown, Connecticut. I think the medical call was for an unresponsive prisoner in their cell. So when we got to the prison, we parked the ambulance in a parking garage that was connected to the prison. Then, once inside the prison, we were made to wait at a couple different guard desks while they took their time getting us to the block where the prisoner was housed. At one of the guard stations, a correctional officer said something like, "The guy that you are about to see is a psych prisoner who is doing a life sentence for killing his parents and also their dog." The correctional officer went on to say that the prisoner complained of difficulty breathing, but they waited 2 hours before calling for an ambulance because if he dies, they are going to save the taxpayer $200,000 a year. So after entering the prison and waiting at a few different correctional officer stations, we were finally let into the block where the inmate was housed. And at that time, every prisoner was in their cell with the cell door locked. So we crossed across the main area and walked over to the numbered cell that he was in. From the guard station, they hit a button that electronically opened his cell door, and the two of us went in. So the prisoner is lying face down on his bunk, and he was a large male who weighed approximately 250 or 260 pounds. He was in a one-occupant cell, and the cell was completely empty of personal belongings. So when an EMT, when an emergency medical technician is teamed up with a paramedic, the EMT acts as something like the paramedic's assistant. And we were told by the management at Danbury Ambulance that when you are working with a paramedic, the paramedic is in charge. You have to do what the paramedic says because they are the senior employee. So Jeff just stands there looking at the patient. And I say, should I try to get a pulse or a blood pressure reading on him? And Jeff says, no, don't touch him. Just leave him exactly as he is. And I'm going to pronounce him as a DOA, or a dead on arrival. And I say something like, well, what if he's still alive? And Jeff says, didn't you hear what the guard just said? They waited a long time before calling us to make sure that he is dead. So he's dead. And at that point, Jeff walked back out of the cell, and we went back across the main block and were let back into the hallway where the guard office was. And Jeff asked to use their phone so that he could call the coroner, which was located at Danbury Hospital. So Jeff goes behind the desk and he picks up the phone, and then he turns away and he begins whispering on the phone so that I cannot hear him. So I do not know what he said to the coroner. So after he hung up, he said something about the coroner to the correctional officers. And then one of the COs begins to walk us down the hallway. And I think that we are leaving at that point. I think that we are being led back to the garage where our ambulance is parked. But instead of going there, the correctional officer brings us to another block. They open the main gate and they gesture for us to go in. So we walk into another block, and this block has all the cell doors open, and all the inmates are walking around because it appears to be rec time. So the door is then closed behind us, and we were now standing in another block where there appeared to be younger inmates, in their early 20s, and there are two approximately 20-year-old men sitting on one of the tables that is close to the front gate, and they are both looking at us. So in my opinion, they are attempting to show off a little bit. So I look at them for a second and see that they are staring at me. So I just looked around the block and then up at the TV so that I did not have to stare back at them. So I did not notice this at first, but when I looked over at Jeff, I see that he is completely turned around and he is standing with his face to the door that we had just been let into. His face is literally 1 inch from the main door, and he's standing there as if he can't wait to be let back out. So Jeff appeared to panic, and instead of just acting normal, he acted like he was afraid, especially of these two younger guys who were sitting on this table. And these guys were kind of staring at us, but it was nothing to get nervous about. So the correctional officers must have made us wait in there for about 10 or 15 minutes. And it was kind of awkward with Jeff standing there, with Andy Strominger standing there with his nose to the door the whole time. So I really do not understand why the correctional officers did that. At the time, I thought it was because they wanted to mess with us a little bit, that they were kind of joking around. They should have just walked us back out to the garage and let us leave the prison, or they should have just let us stand there by the guard desk out in the hallway. I do not understand why they would walk us into another block and have us wait there for 10 or 15 minutes on our way out of the prison. While we're standing there, I may have tried to make some conversation with Jeff and asked him, "Do you know why we're in here?" But Jeff just stood there and said, "I don't know." So eventually we were let out of the block and we were walked to the garage bay where our ambulance was parked. So now that I write this and have read it a couple of times, it occurred to me that maybe the corrupt correctional officers wanted us to wait there so that they could go into that inmate's cell and make sure that he was dead. So they wanted us to wait in that prison while they did that. But I still do not understand why they would have us wait in another block during recreation time. Why wouldn't they just have us wait in the hallway or at one of the CO desks in the prison? Why did they bring us to that other block? In any case, Jeff, also known as Andy Strominger, seems to be someone who was chosen by Danbury Ambulance to assist Garner Prison in Newtown, Connecticut, whose correctional officers admitted that they had waited 2 hours before calling an ambulance when a prisoner complained of difficulty breathing. Jeff's strange behavior in providing medical care for that inmate suggested somebody who was used to being outright negligent while working in the medical field. He would not even walk over and try to get the patient's pulse or blood pressure, and instructed me not to touch the patient and leave him exactly as he is. And then he acted secretive when he got on the phone with the coroner at Danbury Hospital. I think that in order to pronounce a patient as DOA or dead on arrival, you are going to have to at least get vital signs, if not hook them up to the heart monitor, which we had with us and carried into the prison. And Jeff did none of these things. So I think that Jeff acted as part of a team that was accustomed to this. So in conclusion, due to all of the people mentioned in this report being affiliated with the Event Horizon Telescope program, I believe that the Event Horizon Telescope program has very little to do with locating and then taking a photograph of a black hole, and has more to do with radio frequency energy technology, like telescopes being utilized as weapons and torture devices. Like always, the intelligence community will often hide what they are working on by having a front company or a front objective that will serve as a buffer or an excuse to what they are really working on. I think that the Event Horizon Telescope program concerning linking dozens of high-powered radio frequency telescopes together was to experiment with and utilize these telescopes as weapons in the MK Ultra program. I think that by linking these radio frequency telescopes together served in the capacity of increasing the levels of radio frequency energy being directed to certain areas on Earth, which will then be used for military purposes involving MK Ultra mind control and directed energy weapon attacks. So last, I want to include some video evidence of Andy Strominger being and working in the Keene, New Hampshire area where I am from, and the Event Horizon Telescope program does this to monitor their targets while they harass and torture them with their radio frequency technology and their directed energy weapon systems. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos of Andy Strominger in disguise. In the Black Holes documentary, I would guess Andy Strominger to be in his late 50s or early 60s. However, he could change his looks and appear like an older man who looks to be in his mid-70s. So in July of 2019, I had bought a little bike for my daughter at a second-hand store. So I brought it into Andy's Cycle that used to be on Winchester Street in Keene, New Hampshire. I guess it closed at the end of 2019. I read on the internet. So as you see, this is Andy Strominger in disguise. He could change his appearance and appear like an older man in his mid-70s. So at Andy's Cycle, he said his name was Andy, and he seemed to be an angry old man that looked to be somewhere in his mid to late 70s. As you could also notice, Andy Strominger can switch personalities and look and sound like a completely different individual. His voice is completely different than the voice he uses in the Black Hole documentary.
Brand new.
The chain is brand new?
Of course it is.
So do you need to put grease on that?
Once in a while.
Once in a while? How much does that cost,
Once in a
sir?
while, what you do, you get some Triflow, and you put 1 drop per link. That's it. See how I'm doing it?
Yes, sir.
1 drop per link. But it's okay for a while because it's, brand new.
Uh-huh.
Once or twice a month we'll do it in most cases.
Okay. Could I get some pictures of the bike that you want to sell me here when she outgrows this?
What bike is that?
You said this would be a good bike for her. You said it was
Oh, maybe. I
$350.
haven't seen her for size yet.
Yeah, that's a
But
good
you
one.
can take a picture. What color do you think she might like?
Yellow. She's partial to
Well,
yellow,
these are
but
the colors we have
oh, great.
for $350.
All right, terrific.
But you can take a picture, of course, you know.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Take a picture of it and go from there. But you should bring her in if you decide, so you can fit her to the right size.
All right, great. Could I get a bottle of that too, sir? Could I buy a bottle of that grease from you?
You don't have it in stock.
Oh, you don't?
A couple of days ago, I got more coming by Friday.
By Friday? Okay, I'll be back in on
You'll
Friday.
be fine for at least a week or two on that.
Okay, and that's a giant. This is the same model right here, right, sir?
No, it's not.
No?
No, up to 400.
That's up to 400. Okay.
50 bucks more, so on sale like both of them. Anyways, 350 and 400.
Okay, and this is once again will be too young for her.
Haven't seen her, Dad. Haven't seen her.
Okay,
This is $299.
that's $299 for that one.
She might fit that fine. Don't know yet.
All right, well, Andy, thank you so much for your help.
Yeah, bring it down.
Okay.
It's so convenient.
Yes, sir.
Let me take a look at her.
All right, sir.
Enjoy yourself now.
You too. Thank you very much. So this video was taken in July of 2019. So you could hear what this guy sounded like and see how these people have multi-personality disorder. So I'm going to assume that Andy Strominger may have been in the armed services. He may have been in the military. So this is the attitude and personality he puts on at certain functions. He's the old, hard military guy. And then in other venues, like Andy Strominger, a physicist from the Event Horizon Telescope program, he acts almost like a yuppie, soft-spoken, and nerdy or brainy character. And I guess this is common with many actors in Hollywood. And I guess that by using a sophisticated makeup system and wearing wigs and contact lenses and glasses and changing their whole appearance kind of assists in this transformation when they become someone else. And they are groomed to do this through the MK Ultra program. They use the radio frequency technology to connect people together so that one acts as a transmitter and the other acts as a receiver. And this assists in them completely changing their personality. So as you can see, this change is very significant when Andy Strominger acts as Andy from Andy's Cycle. So last week, I was raking leaves right along the street at the edge of the road. This would be the beginning of October of 2021. And I hear a car tearing around the corner. And I step back a couple of steps and I look into the car. And I saw very clearly that it was Andy from Andy's Cycle tearing up the road. And it's a very dangerous thing to do because it's on a blind corner. I have to slow down to 5 or 10 miles an hour when I make a right onto my road. And for the past 2 or 3 weeks, there have been people just racing past my house. And these people are just flooring it, speeding around a blind corner and just peeling out up a dirt road, going as fast as they can. So the last video that I'm going to show you of Andy Strominger in disguise was taken in the winter of 2019. It was taken in January of 2019. And I was walking into Staples, located on Key Road in Key, New Hampshire. So I parked my car and started to walk in. And 2 people were waiting in a vehicle. And as soon as I got out of my car, they got out of theirs and began to walk behind me. So I turned around with my camera and I acted as if I was on the phone so that I could get a video of these people. what's up? I'm just trying to get a tripod. I'll be right over as soon as I get the tripod, alright? So this is a video of Andy Strominger dressed up like a woman. He is dressed in drag. So Andy Strominger could also change his appearance and appear like a woman. So like I said before, this is a big practice in the US military and in the establishment. They are favoring homosexuals in the military. And it seems that the US military, together with the Freemasons, are deciding who gets the best jobs or who gets any jobs at all in the US government and media establishment. That seems to be who is making all of the decisions for the US government and the establishment these days is the US military and the International Order of Freemasons, which is basically England. And they are favoring homosexuals because they are striving for a society without families. In the future, they plan on eliminating traditional families. They want to eliminate constitutional rights, and they want everything controlled by a military dictatorship. Okay, the last realization that I had about Andy Strominger is that he is most likely the bass player from a rock band called the Red Hot Chili Peppers and goes by the name of Flea. So this is not a physicist at all. This is a member of an alternative rock band called the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He plays bass for the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So this highlights why the establishment cannot be taken seriously. It's like a giant party for elementary school kids happening in your government and in your establishment. Nothing that they do could be taken serious. So Flea just wrote a book. It's a memoir called Flea. And it has to do with his childhood before he got into the band the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So he is being interviewed. I saw him on YouTube being interviewed by an editor at Amazon Books. And her name is Sarah Wilson. So Sarah Wilson and Amazon.com Books rolls out the red carpet to advertise Flea's new memoir, Flea. So Amazon.com is a huge monopoly corporation, and they're taking over every market, including for literature, for books. So they want to entirely control the market, and they promote people like Flea and his memoir. And this highlights that Flea is an insider. Everybody thinks that he's this cool punk rock musician. And in this interview, he says his book was written to bring people together and for love and for compassion and for the love of books. And as he is saying this, it's like he believes it. It's like a part of his personality doesn't want to acknowledge what else this guy does, which is work for the MK Ultra program. And they target independent writers and filmmakers such as myself. I am the subject of men like Flea's hatred and jealousy because I am a self-published writer. I spent 10 years writing a book for high school age kids, for young adult kids, to get them into reading. And I put a lot of time and effort into that book. And after 10 years, just as I was putting the finishing touches on that book, this is when the electronic harassment and directed energy weapon attacks began, as fate would have it. So it is a surprise to me to find out that individuals like Flea, out of all people, would hate independent artists and independent writers and make it his life's mission to attack people such as myself. So take a look at this individual's eyes. Take a look at Flea's eyes here. This is a common look that I see in Hollywood actors. It's this blank reptilian look in their eyes. It's this dead look in their eyes that they get. So start to notice the signs of these people who are involved in the MK Ultra program, or all the offshoots of the MK Ultra program, like the Event Horizon Telescope Group. So Flea is the same thing as a corporate employee. He is also an actor. He was in several Hollywood films, and that comes in handy with all the other roles that he plays, like acting like a physicist, working for the Event Horizon Telescope program. It is my opinion that several professional writers employed by Amazon.com are the people that wrote his book. They probably held his hand and wrote a majority of that book. And they will keep all the underground writers and independent writers down. And they will promote these professional actors and frauds like Flea, whose true ambition in life is to stalk and harass targets of the MK Ultra program. In this interview, Flea also says, he says his dad was an official of the Australian government, and his dad brought him to the States when he was a young kid for some assignment through the Australian government. And his dad left him here and moved back to Australia when his mother met another man who was a musician. So that was how Flea found his way to the US, through the Australian government. I spoke about this before. The establishment likes to put all of their professional actors and musicians that will go on to play dozens of roles for the establishment in areas like Brookfield, Connecticut. And I believe that Flea was another one of these establishment actors that was put into Brookfield, Connecticut. So Flea went by the name of Kevin Walsh in Brookfield, Connecticut. I just looked up Flea on Wikipedia, and it said he was born in 1962, which would make him 13 years older than I am. So when I was a freshman in high school, and he was in my class, I was 15 years old, and this guy was in his late 20s. This guy was 27 or 28 years old.